There is one moment from the set of Speed that nobody talks about. Not the bus jump, not the bomb, not the massive explosion at the end. One single scene where Sandra Bullock looked at Keanu Reeves and everything just fell apart. She lost it completely. And when you find out exactly what happened, you will understand why she said filming with him was the hardest thing she had ever done. Not because the role was tough, but because the man standing across from her was simply too much to handle. Stay with me, because this story gets better with every single second. Let's go all the way back to 1994. America was obsessed with action movies. Big explosions, fast cars, tough guys saving the world. Hollywood was pumping out blockbusters left and right, each one trying to outmuscle the last. Studios were spending more money, hiring bigger names, and building bigger sets. Audiences were eating it up because there was a formula and everybody knew exactly what it was. And then one summer, a movie came along that did something nobody expected. It put an ordinary woman behind the wheel of a city bus and made the whole world hold its breath. That movie was Speed. And the two people sitting at the center of it all were Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock. Now, if you were alive in the 90s, you already know their names. But what you might not know is just how close that movie came to never happening the way it did. The script went through so many changes, it barely resembled the final product. The cast was almost completely different. The director Jan de Bont was fighting battles on every front. With the studio, with the logistics, with a production schedule that would have broken lesser filmmakers. And in the middle of it all, there was a behind-the-scenes story brewing between the two leads that nobody saw coming until it was almost too late. Sandra was born in 1964 in Arlington, Virginia. Her father John worked for the Army, and her mother Helga was a German opera singer. That combination alone tells you everything you need to know about her. She grew up between two worlds, spending 12 formative years living in Germany and Austria, while her mother performed in grand opera houses across Europe. She was not a typical American kid watching Saturday morning cartoons and riding bikes around the neighborhood. She was absorbing culture, language, music, and art from the time she could walk. She studied ballet. She sang in children's choirs alongside other opera singers' kids. And she watched her mother command entire audiences from a stage, holding thousands of people in complete silence, making them feel things they had not expected to feel that evening. Something clicked inside Sandra during those years. She did not just want to perform. She wanted to make people feel something real. When her family moved back to Virginia, Sandra did not slow down for a single second. She was a cheerleader and a theater kid, and the kind of person who made every room more alive just by walking into it. She was funny in the way that actually matters, not rehearsed or performative, but genuinely and instinctively quick. She earned her drama degree from East Carolina University in 1987, packed everything she owned, and headed straight to Manhattan. And that is where reality hit her like a wall. New York does not care how talented you are. It does not care how hard you worked in school or how many standing ovations you received back home. It has seen 1,000 Sandras, and it will see 1,000 more. So she did what every great actor does when the industry is not paying attention yet. She hustled. She worked as a bartender. She checked coats at restaurants. She went to audition after audition, sitting in waiting rooms full of women who looked just like her, hearing no more times than she could count. But she kept going. She never stopped. And eventually the right person saw her in an off-Broadway production, and the door cracked open just enough for her to push her way through. Small roles followed. A TV movie here. A short-lived series there. She did the work that nobody celebrates, but everybody has to do. By the early 90s, she had built enough of a reputation that she was starting to get noticed for bigger things. But nothing could have prepared her for the phone call that came about Speed. The role of Annie Porter, the woman who ends up behind the wheel of a city bus rigged with a bomb, was not originally written for her. The part was first offered to Halle Berry. Halle passed. She later joked that she simply did not want to drive a bus. And honestly, looking back decades later, she admitted the movie gods may not have been on her side that particular day. Because when Sandra stepped in, something completely different happened. Something that could not have been planned or manufactured or replicated with anyone else. Now, let's talk about the man on the other side of that chemistry. Keanu Reeves in 1994 was at a crossroads that most people in his position would not have been able to navigate cleanly. People knew him as the lovable, goofy Ted from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, a role that had made him famous and beloved, but it also stuck to him in ways that were starting to limit what the industry thought he could do. He had shown glimpses of something deeper in Point Break, playing an FBI agent pulled into the world of extreme sports and moral ambiguity. But Hollywood had not fully committed to seeing him as a serious action lead just yet. Director Jan de Bont had a different vision. He saw something in Keanu that others were missing, a quiet intensity, a stillness that the camera absolutely loved. He wanted to take that surfer boy image and shatter it completely. Before Keanu, the studio went after almost every major name you can think of. Tom Cruise, Tom Hanks, Wesley Snipes. They all passed or could not make the scheduling work. And then Keanu walked in and something settled. De Bont pushed him to transform his body into something that could believably jump from a moving Jaguar onto a speeding city bus. And Keanu did not show up half-committed. He threw himself into it entirely. He worked harder than the production required. He showed up early and left late and asked questions about the script that went deeper than the action sequences. And then in October of 1993, right in the middle of filming, the worst possible thing happened. His closest friend, River Phoenix, passed away suddenly. They had been deeply connected, the kind of friendship that forms between two young actors who understand each other's specific loneliness in a business that does not always make room for sensitivity. Losing him while in the middle of one of the most physically demanding shoots of his career was devastating in a way that Keanu has never fully been able to put into words. De Bont saw his lead actor in real pain and did something remarkable. He reshuffled the entire shooting schedule so Keanu could work on quieter scenes while he grieved. He gave him room to breathe. During breaks between takes, Keanu would retreat to his trailer and read Hamlet. He found something in those words, something about loss and duty and the impossible weight of carrying on when everything inside you wants to stop. And when the cameras rolled again, every bit of that grief appeared in his face. Jack Traven felt like a real man carrying a real and unresolved burden. Because he was. Here is where the story starts to get truly interesting. While all of this was happening, Keanu and Sandra were spending day after day together on a city bus, locked in close quarters, performing scene after scene that required them to be completely in sync. And something was building between them that had nothing to do with the script. It actually started during the audition process, weeks before filming began. Sandra later recalled that the chemistry test with Keanu involved physical scenes, rolling around on the floor together to see if they had any believable spark. It was the kind of test that can feel awkward and clinical and expose every uncomfortable thing about being an actor. At one point, Keanu stumbled and accidentally grabbed her in a way that was definitely not in the script. He panicked immediately. He turned red. He started apologizing a mile a minute, tripping over his own words, genuinely mortified. And Sandra just looked at him, completely straight-faced, and asked if he was trying to cop a feel. The tension broke instantly. The room changed. And in that single moment, the tone for their entire relationship was set. It was going to be warm and playful and completely honest, and full of the kind of laughter that makes hours disappear without you noticing. On set, that energy only grew stronger. Keanu talked about how everywhere Sandra went felt like springtime had arrived. He said she had a wonderful energy that was impossible not to feel the moment she walked into a room. He was not crafting quotes for oppressed her. He meant every word, and you could tell the difference. Sandra, for her part, was falling hard. She admitted much later that she had a massive, overwhelming crush on Keanu from the very first day they worked together. She said he was too sweet and too handsome, and that being completely serious around him was almost impossible. Almost. Because she was a professional who had worked too hard and too long to let anything unravel her on set. She had passed her Real bus driving test on the very first try, something she brought up constantly with enormous pride, and she was not going to let anything compromise the work she was doing. But then came the scene. The moment that has been whispered about and passed around for 30 years without ever getting the full story it deserves. They were filming one of the more emotionally intense moments of movie, a scene that required close physical contact and real vulnerability, and the kind of absolute presence that only comes when two actors have genuinely connected. The cameras were rolling. The crew was silent. Everything was perfectly set. And Keanu did something. It was not planned, and it was not in the script. It was simply him being exactly who he is, warm and genuine and just slightly, perfectly surprising. And Sandra looked at him, and something in her cracked completely open. She started laughing. Not a polite, quickly suppressed giggle. Full body shaking, stomach hurting, eye-watering, completely uncontrollable laughter. The kind that takes over your whole body and does not stop just because you desperately want it to. The kind that makes everyone in the room start laughing too, even if they have no idea what triggered it. She broke character entirely. The scene stopped. The crew reset. Sandra covered her face and tried to pull herself together. But she could not. Every single time she looked at him, it started all over again. Because for her, in that moment, Keanu Reeves was not just a co-star delivering a line. He was the man she had a crushing, completely unspoken crush on. He was standing right there being impossibly charming and completely unaware of the effect he was having on her. Or so she thought. The truth did not come out until more than 2 decades later. In 2018, Sandra sat down on the Ellen DeGeneres show and finally said out loud what she had been carrying since 1994. She told Ellen and the audience and everyone watching at home that she had a huge and genuine crush on Keanu while they were filming Speed. She said the feeling had seemed entirely one-sided. She had spent years quietly wondering if maybe something had simply not clicked for him in that particular way. She filed the whole experience away as a beautiful, bittersweet missed connection and moved on with her life as gracefully as she could. And then, just months after Sandra made that confession, Keanu sat down in that same chair on that same show. Ellen asked him about it, barely able to contain herself. And Keanu, without missing a beat, without performing surprise or playing it for laughs, told the world that he had a crush on Sandra too. The audience completely lost it. Ellen lost it. And somewhere, watching that moment unfold on a screen, Sandra Bullock sat with the full weight of what she was hearing. For 30 years, they had both been carrying the same secret in the same direction, and neither one of them had ever said a word. The friendship that followed the film was unlike anything Hollywood typically produces. These two stayed genuinely close for decades in the quiet, private ways that actually mean something. Sandra would write Keanu letters. She would call him after his motorcycle accidents just to hear his voice and make sure he was all right. They had dinners together without cameras or publicists or agendas. They showed up for each other in the small moments the public never sees, the ones that matter most. In 2006, they came back together on screen for The Lake House, a romantic drama where their characters were separated not by a speeding bus, but by time itself. The spark was still there, unmistakable and completely undimmed. Keanu spoke about Sandra in interviews in ways that felt more like poetry than promotional talking points. He called her funny as heck and smart as a whip. He said she made him feel both comfortable and genuinely challenged at the same time, a combination that is incredibly rare and almost impossible to manufacture. And Sandra, every single time his name came up in conversation, lit up in a way that simply could not be faked. There's one story that captures exactly who Keanu Reeves is at his core and precisely why Sandra Bullock could never quite keep herself together around him. Years after Speed wrapped and the world had moved on, Sandra mentioned casually in passing that she had never actually tried champagne and truffles. It came up naturally in conversation the way things do. She did not ask for anything. She was not hinting. She simply mentioned it and the conversation moved on. A few days later there was a knock at her door. It was Keanu. He had brought both the champagne and the truffles. He did not make a grand event out of it. He did not stay long or expect anything in return. He just wanted her to know what they tasted like. Then he left. No performance. No cameras. No announcement. Just a man who had listened closely enough to remember something small and had quietly done something about it. Sandra said that gesture left her completely speechless. And honestly, who could possibly blame her? When asked years later why they had never actually dated given everything that existed between them, Sandra gave an answer that said everything there was to say. She was afraid, not of Keanu, not of a relationship with him, but of losing him. She said that if they had tried and it had not worked, if the romance had fractured the way romances so often do, she would have lost one of the most important and irreplaceable people in her life. She chose the friendship because the friendship was too precious to gamble with. Though she did admit, with a quiet smile, that he is such a genuinely good man that they probably could have made it work just fine. Keanu has never stopped talking about wanting to work with her again. He says he is always looking for the right project, something worthy of what they bring out in each other. And Sandra has a very specific vision for what that project should look like. She wants them to do a comedy together. Two slightly older, wonderfully funny people in an RV, she says, driving painfully slowly across America and irritating every single person they encounter along the way. She calls it the bookend to Speed. Where Speed was about going as fast as possible and never stopping, this would be about taking every second of the time they have left and truly savoring it. That image, those two people, older and wiser, and still making each other laugh without even trying, might just be the most romantic thing either of them has ever described. Because that is what this story is really about. Not just the wet spot scene. Not just the uncontrollable laughter on a Los Angeles movie set in the summer of 1994. It is about two people who found something genuinely rare in the middle of a chaotic production and held on to it for 30 years without ever needing to define it or label it or turn it into something the world could easily categorize. They never became a couple. They never needed to. What they built is something most people spend their entire lives searching for and never actually find. A connection that does not require a name. A friendship so deep and so honest that it can survive decades of distance and completely separate lives and still feel like home the moment they are in the same room together. Sandra Bullock could not keep it together in that scene because Keanu Reeves made it impossible. He was too real, too warm, too completely and effortlessly himself. And she was already too far gone to pretend otherwise. That wet spot on the floor of that bus became a symbol of something neither of them planned, and both of them carried quietly forward into the rest of their lives. The next time you watch Speed, pay attention to the moments between the action. Watch the way Sandra looks at him when the camera is not supposed to be catching it. Watch the way Keanu leans in just a fraction closer than the script actually requires. Because now you know what was really happening on that bus. And it had absolutely nothing to do with the bomb.